Hello and welcome along to another episode, installment. I'm trying to think of the right adjective really, but in conservation with, born out of a pandemic, and we're still here. My name is David Lindo, also known as the Birder, and tonight, this afternoon, this morning, I'm speaking with a man that I've known for several years now, Gerard Gorman, who not only is he a bird guide, but he's also someone who knows a hell of a lot about woodpeckers, and we're going to be talking about wrynecks in particular. Before I go any further, I just want to say thank you for everyone coming today, and to thank our sponsors, Leica Sport Optics, as well as the Diputación de Cáceres, and they are a tourism board that looks after the northern province of a region in southwest Spain by the name of Extremadura, which some of you may know is a great place for birding. There's a couple of species of woodpecker there as well. So, Gerard, good afternoon, good evening. How are you and where are you?
I'm in Budapest in Hungary, so it's good evening. An hour ahead of London. Yeah. 1 hour behind Kiev.
Yeah. And how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. You look good.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Not many people say that,
actually. Well, there you go.
Yeah, it'd be better if a woman said it, but anyway. Gerard, you were, just to give you a quick rundown on yourself, you were born in Merseyside in England, in fact, Liverpool,
yeah.
All right?
Just on the edge of Liverpool, yeah.
Yeah, but you spent most of your adult life abroad, and you've been interested in wildlife, especially birds, since childhood. Can you tell us what was your, as our American friends will say, what was your spark moment? What was the time when you suddenly thought, you know what, I am interested in birds?
Now, I'm going to have to think back an awful long way. We had this thing at school, primary school, called the nature table. And we used to bring things in. It was always there in the corner of the classroom when I was about 7 or 8 years of age. And used to put things on. There were bird nests, twigs, knots, acorns, anything that you found that was from the natural world, you bring it in and used to put it on this table. We had a very good teacher. And I don't know why, but I ended up running that nature table. She must have seen a spark that's the kid who's interested in nature the most. So that was a big thing for me, that I used to run this nature table, which was like a buffet of things from the countryside. Because when you went outside Liverpool or Manchester or even London in those days, but certainly now, not so much, there was quite a lot of countryside. But where I was brought up there is now housing estates and Burger Kings, but there used to be a lot of fields and countryside and stuff, but it's sad really. So that's how it started. And my mates at school, 2 or 3 of us used to go, get ready for this, but it was a long time ago, bird egging, when we were kids, nesting. When we were just kids, didn't have binoculars, there was no RSPB to join there. And that got us into looking for things. But I think the first bird I saw, which really, like, as you said, the Americans would say a spark, was a short-eared owl, which was just in a field near a footy pitch. And I thought that was amazing because no one even knew that bird existed, And I remember that. I must have been about 8, I think. And the first woodpecker that I remember seeing was green woodpecker, which was on a school trip in Cheshire. So that was about an hour from where I was brought up, on one of the estates there, not quite sure which one, but there's these big deer parks and stately homes, and they always have grassy areas, and there was a green woodpecker. And I remember seeing that, and when everyone was being marched off to look at this big stately home, we sneaked off to chase this woodpecker, and that stuck in my mind, and I think that was it. Short-eared owl and green woodpecker.
Nice. You talk about egging.
Yeah.
And for those who are not familiar with the term collecting bird eggs, which is illegal now,
Yeah.
but even when I was a kid, that was a thing. And I
Mhm.
remember the first bird that I ever met, because when I started, I had no one around me, so I kind of, was operating blind. But my dad had a mate he worked with, like a foreman in his factory. He was a birder, and he came around and took me out birding, and he was an egger. And I was very lucky not to be influenced into collecting eggs. In fact, he showed me how to find nests,
Yeah.
but stopped short of actually showing me, the fact that you can take the eggs out and blow them and all that sort of stuff. So I'm glad that I didn't learn that, because if I did, I probably wouldn't be talking to you. I'll be behind
Yeah,
bars.
but we gave up when we were about 10 years of age. I think the problem is those people who carry on into adult life doing that sort of stuff.
Exactly. Anyway, you made yourself a name as a pioneering guide in Eastern
Mm.
Europe per se.
Mhm.
You started before the political changes in the early 1990s, exploring every country from the Baltic to the Black Sea.
Mhm.
And you've also, in your birding travels, been all over the place, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. And you were the first recipient of the Eric Hoskin Award for a writing project entitled Birds and Political Change in Eastern Europe in 1994, where you highlighted the problems for nature conservation which arose at the end of the Cold War. I think that's a whole, different conversation there. So, we'll skate over that for the moment. But, you're here because your main ornithological interest are indeed woodpeckers. And you've written a whole slew of books: Woodpeckers of the World, The Complete Helm Guide in 2014. And you've also written a couple of others. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I'm sure you do.
I can show you. Focus with the Black Woodpecker. Focus is bad, but you get the idea.
You need to put it in front of your body, because we can't, that's it.
There you go.
Nice.
Yeah, the Woodpeckers of Europe, which is out of print. So collector's item now. And the one you mentioned, the Woodpeckers of the World.
Which I'm a proud owner of.
Are you? Good. Did you buy it, or did I give you a free copy?
Well,
you don't need to answer that.
Yeah, I missed out on that one. I wasn't in the right queue, obviously.
Okay. And a few more. So yeah, I've written a few books on woodpeckers, my favorite birds. Yeah.
Yeah, and when not writing, you're ultimately a field guy. You're in the forest, and you put a ton of hours into watching woodpeckers to good use. And you're also a sound recordist, but you've also now written your latest book, which is the Wryneck, Biology, Behavior, Conservation, and Symbolism. You put in front of your body. What a nice title there. So I met you. I came to Budapest, and you were my guide. And I can't remember when that was, 2008 or 2009, something like that. That's when I first met you.
I think we met in England before that, but the first proper meeting in the field was here. Yeah.
Yeah, they're the ones I tend to remember most, actually, when you meet someone in the field. When you meet someone in a bird fair tent or down the street, it's a bit different to actually being out and experiencing some wildlife with that person. And I remember, in fact, making a YouTube video of my visit, which maybe if Claire could try and find. I think it was called Birding in Budapest or something. But you were my guide, and one of the things that struck me was when we were together in the forest and you were making the calls of various species quite beautifully, in terms of, like, for example, the black woodpecker and the grey-headed woodpecker. I remember quite clearly. And I was in a stage of my life when I was struggling to see any of Europe's woodpeckers. It's like one of these things, you really struggle hard to see these birds, and all of a sudden, bam, you're seeing them all the time. There is an art to seeing woodpeckers, isn't there, especially in Europe?
Well, the woodland birds, aren't they? Forest birds. I mean, if you go to a sewage farm or the sea coast or a marsh or a grassland, you've got to find the birds unless someone shows you them. And you can scan around with your telescope, binoculars. But when you look for things like owls as well, and fly catchers in the forest and woodpeckers, you've got an awful lot of trees in the way, haven't you? You know, you've got to find them. You need some tracking skills, and you need to know calls. So I suppose that's why you found it a bit more difficult, because of the environment that they live in. You need to find them before you look at them.
Yeah, because I mean, I must admit, being an urban birder, I wasn't hanging around in woodlands, and
Mhm.
even if I started to get an interest in woodlands, I had the unfortunate experience of watching the Blair Witch Project, and that, right, I'm out of woodlands, forget it.
That's bizarre, but never mind.
But
Yeah.
you know, I've come to learn that there are times of year which are best, in tracking woodland birds, but in particular woodpeckers in Eastern Europe. I've noticed, and I know a lot of people. It's like the woodpeckers are grouped with the owls when it comes in. When you're in Europe, to
Mm,
see the owls and see the woodpeckers, you need to be in certain places at certain times, don't you?
mm. Yeah, then some are easy and some are not. The most difficult one is probably white-backed woodpecker. Three-toed woodpecker's is rather silent most of the time, and some of them urban birds. You know about urban birding a bit, I believe. Syrian woodpecker, green woodpecker, great spotted, of course. You get them in. I'm in Budapest now, and it's dark now, but if I just went up the hill from here, you've been there 15 minutes, there's black woodpecker grey-headed all on the edge of the city. So some are easy and some are not.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the pleasure since meeting you actually of now have seen all the European woodpeckers,
Mm,
and you're dead right. I mean, obviously in Britain you got the great spotted and the green woodpeckers who are urban birds, but there's possibilities in other places and even in Britain, like in Croydon in south of London, well, at least a while ago anyway, you can possibly see lesser spotted woodpecker. In fact, I saw my first ever lesser spotted woodpecker in my back garden in Wembley. And then you
wow.
got other species, as you say, the Syrian woodpecker, which is quite an urban species. But the ones that I've only seen a couple of times. I mean, I've only seen the three-toed woodpecker once in Finland, and
Yeah,
the white-backed woodpecker once, and I've also seen the white-backed woodpecker in Spain, which may be split once as well. So there's some species that are really quite, secretive.
yeah. Those two you mentioned, three-toed woodpecker and whiteback, are forest birds, and whiteback woodpecker in particular needs old, mature forest. You're not going to see that in Europe, really, in a park or a garden. Very difficult. So you need to be in pretty wild, decent, mature forest to see those two, or up in the Alps or something like that. So they're just not easy, and they're not in easy places. So that explains why you've only seen them a couple of times, I think.
Yeah. But then, of course, woodpeckers aren't just limited to Europe. I mean, they're all over the world, apart from Antarctica. And I've been
Right.
fortunate over the years to have seen a few in North America, downy woodpecker and like
Mhm.
this one here, hairy woodpecker and the flickers. And then down in South America and also in Asia, Asia, the flamebacks. I mean, they've got some evocative names. And also there's different types of woodpeckers. You've got the small ones, the piculets, haven't you? And you got,
Yes. There's the so-called true woodpeckers, which includes, well, if you talk about Europe, then uh, all of them except the wryneck are the true woodpeckers. You've got the piculets, which are tiny little things, warbler-sized things, and the vast majority of them are in South America. And the two wrynecks. There's the Eurasian wryneck, the European one, and red-throated in Africa. There's only two of them. So yeah, the flamebacks, that's just the name of them, and there's yellow napes as well. Flickers, they're actually what we call true woodpeckers. Or the two hotspots in the world. There's about 240, 250 species of woodpecker in the world, depending on which checklist you follow, which taxonomic list you accept. About 240 or 250, and The two hotspots are South America and Southeast Asia. That's where they've got the highest number of species. Africa's okay, Europe's okay, North America's not bad. And as you've pointed out, the none in Antarctica, can't quite work out why that is really, but there's none there. And then this surprises some people, but there are none in Australasia, New Zealand, Australia, Papua New Guinea, and Madagascar doesn't have any woodpeckers. So there's some interesting holes where they don't exist.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, listen, you've got this new book out called The Wryneck, and really looking forward to reading my copy. Unfortunately, I've not seen it yet, so we're operating blind here. But I'm really interested to learn more about your woodpeckers. So shall we take a look at your little presentation on woodpeckers?
Yeah, put it up.
Zoomers, I know you know this now because you've been doing Zoom for 2 years now, but if you do want to see this in its full Technicolor glory, then you need to put your thing on speaker view, should I say, not gallery view, so you can see the whole of the presentation. And also, I must say now that I am sharing this myself because of technical difficulties and Gerard's points. So please bear with me as Gerard says, move it on, move it on. And you might have to shout at me a few times if I don't hear him properly. You're on, Gerard.
The first pic is up there. There's no text with it, but I don't need the text. But there's in that greyish, smoky area on the left there should be some words there, but I don't see them. Maybe there you go. That's it. Yes. Yeah, the Wryneck. So along came COVID a couple of years ago, and I spent a lot more time here at this desk, like a lot of people, than I did in the field for various reasons. And so I thought, well, I won't waste my time. I'll write another book. And I came up with the Wryneck because obviously it was going to be a woodpecker book, as far as I was concerned. But a friend of mine said, what are you going to write now then? And I said, well, I'm thinking of this woodpecker, that woodpecker. And he said, more or less quote, why don't you write one about the weirdest woodpecker of all? And I said, well, what's that? And he said, the Wryneck. Because the first thing we have to say is it's a woodpecker. Doesn't look like one, does it? But it is. We could move to the next one, David. So global distribution. One of the interesting things about the Wryneck, it is a woodpecker. I mean, genetically, DNA studies have shown that it is. Structurally, it is. It's migratory, and very few woodpeckers in the world migrate in the true sense. I don't mean dispersing or being vagrants, but actually like swallows or storks or warblers, going from Europe, that orangey browny area where it breeds, they go to Southeast Asia and Central Africa for the winter, and then they come back in the spring. And then there's just a few little bits in southern Spain and the Mediterranean where there's a resident population. But basically, one of the fascinating things about the Wryneck is it's a migratory woodpecker, and there are not a lot of those in the world. Could go on to the next one. Yeah, there are two species. There's the Jinx torquila, which is the Eurasian one, and this chap, arguably a little bit more attractive with all that rusty rufous color, the red-throated. And it's very similar to our, if you call it our Wryneck, in many ways, shape, size, the calls, its structure, everything. It eats ants as ours does. But a big difference is, apart from the coloration, is this is not migratory. It lives in central, actually scattered in sort of diverse places in Africa, south of the Sahara, but it does not migrate. whereas its cousin, the Eurasian one, does. They very rarely meet. There's a couple of places, like in Kenya or somewhere like that, where you could, in theory, see both at the same time. Next one, David, please. So, can you read that text, folks? The songbird like jizz. I mean, it poses like a songbird. It has a small, thin beak like a songbird, not a robust chisel-like beak that most woodpeckers have. And its coloration, you know, it's pretty drab, but it's subtly beautiful, but it's brown, gray, bit buff. And we're used to seeing woodpeckers with red on them or yellow on them. That's why not a lot of people, but quite a few people, even birders, often question, you know, is it a woodpecker? It is. Someone's just written there, it's a cross between a thrush and a woodpecker. Yeah, that's Claire writing that. Thrush, yeah, it could be in some circumstances confused with a small thrush, like a song thrush. Often people confuse it with a female or a juvenile redback shrike when it flies, or a barbed warbler. Next one, please. Yeah, there's another one. This is a picture I took last year. And they don't pose like a true woodpecker. I know I'm hammering the point, if you don't mind the pun, but you look at that bill, that long tail, like a thrush, as Claire said. Next one. Close up there, I wanted to look at that bill. That bill with the pointed tip, very sharp, fine, is not designed for making holes in timber. So woodpeckers are renowned for pecking wood, and wryneck is the woodpecker that does not often peck wood. And with that bill, it can't. So although I said the DNA shows it's a member of the woodpecker family, it's evolved away from being a woodpecker. Although some people have suggested maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the other woodpeckers evolved away from the wryneck. We don't know. It's a chicken and egg question, that one. Next one. Took these pictures in the Natural History Museum here in Budapest to show the tail. The wryneck on the right, soft, rounded tail. Great spotted woodpecker there on the left, sorry, great spotted, and the vast majority of woodpeckers have very strong, stiff central tail feathers, and they need those to provide support when they're clinging to a tree, feeding or making a hole or going in and out of the hole. Propped up on a tree trunk in the vertical, they have these very strong central tail feathers, and wryneck lacks them. Next one. Well, took this one about an hour north of here in the Bergern Hills near the River Danube last year again. Someone's an abandoned old orchard, someone's lopped off the bough of this, I think it was a walnut tree, and the wryneck is using that hollow. It was using that hollow as a nest because, as I just mentioned, with that bill you can't make a nest hole. So wrynecks are unusual again in the family for being the woodpecker, along with the red-throated in Africa, which does not peck its own hole. It relies on other woodpeckers, uses their holes, or finds what we might call a natural cavity, like this one, we might say. So again, not really woodpecker-like, the wryneck. Next one. Are we going to the next slide? Yeah. If I remember, this was an old great spotted woodpecker hole that this bird was using. And they're very dependent on great spotted and those sort of middle-sized woodpeckers for holes, very dependent. because they can't make their own. Birds which make their own holes are called primary cavity excavators, and birds like wrynecks and flycatchers and doves and owls which can't make holes are called secondary cavity users. They're the technical terms. And wryneck is one of the very few woodpeckers which is a secondary cavity user. Next one. Yes, now this was a garden in the Buk Hills in the wine country, about 2 hours from here, east of here. And this was a middle spotted woodpecker hole. And the story here was, I knew the middle spotted had used it one year, went back the next year knowing it probably use it again, and got ready to get the middle spotted. And I just scratched on the tree a bit to see if the middle spotted would come out. And out came this chap, wryneck. Obviously the middle spotted had gone somewhere else. Yeah, comment come up there. Am I supposed to, I can answer these. Ringneck parakeets, sadly, yeah. Yeah, that's in London, isn't it? Where you've got lots of ringneck parakeets in the parks. And they use, what do they use? Green woodpecker holes? Probably. Because they can't make holes, but they're a cavity nester. Next one. Yeah, this was again last year in another a garden of a friend of mine, and this was an apple tree with an old great spotted woodpecker hole. And my friend called me and said, "Come, we've got wrynecks again." And I said, "What do you mean again?" He said, "Oh, it's been nesting in this hole for 3 years." So that is an interesting thing about wrynecks. They come back from the Mediterranean or from Africa, wherever they've been wintering. They get back to Hungary, for example, and they're very site loyal. They go often to the same hole that they used the previous year. Okay. Now, this was in Austria. A friend of mine took this picture, a very good friend of mine, another woodpecker chappie. And this was amazing because it was a cherry tree in a garden, and which was dead. So they sawed it off. So it's but it was hollow inside, like a chimney. And this wryneck pair, because his head's coming out of the hole, which you can't see. And I said, "Well, what happens when it rains?" And they said, "Well, they just carried on." So it was like what we call a chimney hole, you know, not side on the tree, but a cavity going down vertically, and they use that. And you think, well, why would they use that? It's quite vulnerable. But I think there was nothing else. If there's no available woodpecker holes or natural cavities, they'll use what they can. Next one, please. Yeah, I like this. This was in the Czech Republic, and this is what I call the luxury box. The chap who put this up, another friend of mine, I was going to say my checkmate, but David said I'm not to make any jokes, so I won't say it. My checkmate made this box because, of course, you've realized by now they love boxes because that's a way of substituting, you know, the lack of natural cavities or woodpecker cavities. Well, this one has a metal shield around the entrance to stop great spotted woodpecker and anything else getting in. It's got a little perch as well to make it easier for him to cling on, or she. That's something I forgot to mention, actually, that wrynecks are not sexually dimorphic. I mean, males and females are all but identical, so it's very difficult to say who is feeding the chicks, but both parents do. Next one. Yes, now back to the anatomy and the woodpecker like or not like stuff. One thing they do have, which woodpeckers have, are long, sticky tongues. I mean, green woodpecker has a very sticky tongue, and so does the wryneck. I've written about 7 centimeters. Yeah. By the way, this bird was a museum specimen. It wasn't killed or anything to take the picture. It was in a museum, and you can see that it extends out of the bill about 3 times longer than the bill itself. This is a very woodpecker-like feature. So as I said earlier, that whichever came first, the wrynecks or the true woodpeckers, whichever it was, they both retained that long tongue that can be extended almost prehensile out of the bill. The next one, please. Yeah, there's one with his bill halfway out, doing what wrynecks do best, like standing on the ground, on grassy areas, licking up ground-dwelling ants. And they don't impale ants or any prey. They lap them up, lick them up with a sticky mucus. Very much like green woodpecker. Next one. Studies have shown around the world that the average wryneck's diet is 90% ants, and not any old ant. They're ground-dwelling ants like black garden ants and meadow ants. They don't often eat wood ants, which are inside woodlands in big ant hills. They don't often go for them. They don't eat carpenter ants, which is the big ants which live inside wood, hence the name carpenter. And in Britain, you don't, I'm presuming a lot of people listening to this are in Britain, but I know some of you won't be, but we don't have carpenter ants in Britain, and no wrynecks actually, but you can see that bill, that's mostly pupa, larva, and 90% of the prey fed can be these ground-dwelling ants. Next one, please. Now, moving on a bit, one of the things that the wryneck is famous for, apart from being a woodpecker that doesn't seem to be a woodpecker, is to do with its name, the wry neck, the twisting neck. And in languages, I looked into this when I was writing my book to put a little chapter at the end on not only the natural history and the birdie stuff, but also the folklore and mythologies. The wryneck is called in many languages snakebird as a folk name. And the reason for that is because it twists its neck, bends its neck, twists its head, a bit like a writhing snake. And this caused problems, we might say, for the wryneck, because in days of old, in Britain, Germany, wherever, it was regarded as a devil's bird, the devil's bird, an evil bird. Why is that? Well, you know, snakes don't have a good reputation, sadly, and any bird that was imitating a snake was surely the work of the devil. That goes back a long way, that belief. Why do they do this? As you can see, there's someone's hand there. Well, this bird was caught to be ringed in a ringing camp, banding camp for our North American friends. And they do it as a defensive thing. They twist and writhe. It's not clear exactly why they do it, but we think it's they're imitating a snake. It's a kind of defensive behavior. Moving on. This again, in a ringing camp, this bird is handheld just before it's going to be released after being ringed. The other thing that they do is this kind of thing. They fan out the crown feathers. This probably combine this sometimes with writhing. That's probably to make themselves look big, a bit like a cobra does when it fans out its head. And all these things are done when they're handled or threatened at the nest, for example. Defensive displays. Next one. Playing possum. So if you're in a ringing camp or anywhere and they catch a few wrynecks, they twist their heads, pretend to be a snake perhaps, fan out their crown feathers, and some of them play dead. They just lie. Quite a few birds do that. That's another kind of defensive thing. They just keep still. Kingfishers do it as well, and play possum. Fascinating behavior, the wryneck. Moving on, next one, please. Well, I don't know who that dodgy looking chap is, but he's putting up a nest box. As I've written there, the location is important. You've got to put the nest box in the right habitat, open wooded areas, plenty of grazed areas, low vegetation, where there are lots of ants, and the ants are easy to get at, not in the middle of a forest or in the middle of a high field, high vegetation, but in short grassed, grazed areas. The location is important. Sunny areas too. But the height is not important. People said to me, you know, why haven't you got a ladder? Put it up the top of the tree. Wrynecks really don't care about the height of the nest box. The only reason to put it high up would be to keep it away from people. Putting it low down doesn't help with predators like cats or stoats or weasels or whatever, because they can climb up the tree anyway, or certain snakes as well. Asclepian snake in Central Europe takes birds from cavities and nest boxes, but he can go 5, 6, 10, 20 meters up the tree. So there's no real point in putting it high up unless you're in a place with a lot of people where people get curious and start, you know, disturbing the box. The other thing is you do not need to put any nesting material in. We tend to put a little bit of sawdust or gravel in the bottom to stop the eggs, if they take the box and they lay eggs, stop them rolling around on the hard wood at the bottom. But wrynecks don't use nesting material. When you find wrynecks breeding in a nest box with nesting material, that's always the nesting material of a previous occupier, like a great tit or a blue tit or something. Moving on. This is another nest box we put up, and this was successful. Well, at least they didn't see the chicks fledge, but certainly they were breeding in it. We saw them going in and out with food. And this is a classic example of a good location, because this is near the Danube Bend, again, just over an hour from Budapest towards the north, towards Slovakia. And there's lots of nice grassy habitats there, you can see in this hill area, but very few trees. And the trees that there are have no holes in them, like this rather young tree. So putting a nest box is very helpful. They need two things, wrynecks: a cavity and lots of ants. They're the two absolute crucial things. If they have a hole and food, they're sorted. Next one. Yeah, classic woodpecker like eggs, white, unmarked, and not particularly glossy. Now you see the nesting material. Well, the wryneck didn't put that in. That would be, it was in fact a great tit. And wrynecks will evict great tits or any other small passerine, small songbird that's using a box. They'll actually evict them, boot them out. And they're quite aggressive, little wrynecks, but they're not able to evict a great spotted woodpecker or anything like that. Massive competition for nest sites, but that's why boxes are important. The other thing about the wryneck, which makes it different from other woodpeckers, is they lay very large clutches, 6 to 12. 10 eggs is typical, and at least in Europe, Asia were the other relatives of wryneck, the other woodpecker relatives. 4 or 5 eggs is normal. This, you could talk for hours about why this may be, but it's probably because they're migratory, and the chicks, fledglings have many more hazards than non-migratory birds have. So they probably need a lot of chicks, a lot of eggs, and then successful eggs and chicks in order to cover the mortality rate that they experience when going to Africa and back. That's the theory, or one of them anyway. Next one. Typical woodpecker-like chicks. The article, that's the naked, blind for a day or so or more, and there's lots of them. Like all woodpeckers and many cavity nesting birds, they have quite high success rates, probably because, you know, if you're living in a cozy hole, whether it's a nest box or a natural one, or one you've made yourself or one you've stolen from someone else, it's protected from quite a few predators. It's warm, rainproof usually, so that the success rate, the fledgling rate of wrynecks, like most cavity nesters, is much higher than it is for twig nest birds like thrushes, blackbirds, etc. Next one. Yeah, you can see how the bird on the left is significantly bigger than the 2 or 3 on the right. This is typical of many birds, isn't it? That amongst a brood, a family of chicks, 1 or 2 are bigger, healthier, stronger, and 1 or 2 are what you might call runts. You know, they're just small, undernourished, and they don't quite make it. So in every big clutch of 10 or 12 wryneck eggs, 1 or 2 die before they get anywhere near fledging. But all in all, successful fledging rates. Good 80–90% of the chicks will survive to adulthood. And the other thing I wrote there about the pyramid huddle, that's very typical of all woodpeckers, that they huddle together. And another interesting thing we noticed is, we don't know why, but they often point away from the center of the nest towards the walls, as the one on the left is doing classically. Not quite sure why that is. They tend not to point inward to each other. Next one. Yeah, going back to the habitat. Again, this is the same place where 3 slides ago I showed you a nest box on a tree in open country. This is what they need. There is a dead tree there, and that had a hole in it, an old woodpecker hole, I think, great spotted woodpecker probably. And here, closer to us, barren, rocky ground, very good ground ant habitat. You have those 2 things there: a tree for nesting with a natural cavity, woodpecker cavity, or a nest box, and adjacent bare ground, rocky, grazed, full of ants. Classic habitat. Next one, please. This is about 45 minutes from where I'm sitting in Budapest now, just down the main road. An abandoned, disused orchard. This place is full of holes because there's quite a few great spotted woodpeckers and things around there, and the trees are dead and dying, and natural cavities are developing. This is very good wryneck habitat. Short grass, again, lots of ants. Orchards, old orchards, not intensively managed orchards, are great for birds in general, and wrynecks love them, green woodpeckers love them. Things like golden oriole here love them, hoopoo, because they have everything they need: food and somewhere to make a nest. Sadly, across Europe, And I know for a fact that in Britain, old orchards of well, difficult to find old orchards. There used to be so many that a bit intensively farmed now. The old branches with holes are lopped off. Pesticides are used, insecticides, fungicides, so not many insects, not many ants. But old orchards are really excellent habitats, but sadly a disappearing man-made habitat. Next one. Yes, now what's this about? Well, another man-made habitat. On the big tree in the distance there, you can see a wryneck box on that double big tree. Because again, you can see not many big trees there. This is in Hungary, by the way. Nowhere for a great spotted to make a hole, very few places, so wrynecks struggle. But we put the box there because that big slab of concrete was a disused military base. We think it was a military base. Lots of concrete. Ants love that. In fact, there's even a species of ant called Pavement Ant. And you'll know it from your garden if you've got pavement with cracks in, you get ants. So we put this here because we thought, look, they've got the feeding, but there's nowhere to nest. So we'll put a box there. Didn't work though, because hornets took the box. It was full of hornets, which used the hole and then fill it up with the hive, the paper hive. Next one. So finally, there's a classic pose, that little warbler-like bill fanning its head feathers out. As I said there, if you would like to know more, you can ask me tonight, but even more, then you might want to click to the next slide. And there it is. The wryneck, published by Pelagic Publishing in England. Well, I hope there was something interesting there for you.
There was a lot of interesting things there for us. Thank you very much, Gerard, for sharing your knowledge on this fascinating bird. I mean, one question I have for you, the wryneck, actually, I omitted to say was one of my favorite, or is one of my favorite birds. It's in my top 5. And the reason was that the first time I ever saw one, I went to Norfolk for those who know Blakeney Point. You have to walk about 10,000 miles to see anything. And I was 17 with my mate. We were trudging through the shingle along the shoreline, and we stopped to watch some shearwaters and stuff. And we carried on walking, and I suddenly realized I left my bird book behind. So I trudged back, picked up my bird book, because we were actually heading to see where this wryneck was. Picked up my bird book, and I looked up, and I was eye to eye with a dotterel. I'd never seen one before. It was like, and then we walked another 100 miles until we got to the spot where the wryneck was seen the day before, and it was just one tree, one little bush. And we sat on this slope looking down at this bush, and we sat there for an hour and a half and saw maybe a bee, and that was about it. And I had my telescope trained on this bush, and I said, you know what, it's not here. So I remember getting up to go, and my knee hit the telescope and it moved slightly. And I don't know what possessed me, but I looked through the telescope, and there, filling the whole view, was this wryneck. And I was like, I love you. So that was great. But the thing is, in the UK, the wryneck used to be a breeding bird. It's extinct now. It's only normally come across as a migrant. Why has it disappeared from the UK?
Wow, yeah. I think that's page 64 in the book, David. About 200 to 300 are known to pass through Britain every year, mostly in the east and mostly in autumn. Apparently, last year was pretty good. They turned up. One turned up in the middle of Liverpool. I remember that was quite funny because I used to live there. And people were calling me from England, and I said, well, I'm in Budapest, I don't need to, which was amazing. So last year was very good, but it's 200 to 300 come down. Now, because these birds are believed to be Scandinavian birds, Swedish birds, Norwegian birds, which go slightly off course and end up going through Scotland and down through England, and then end up going back to the continent, probably to Spain or France, and then onwards. Why did they disappear as breeding birds in Britain? This is complicated, and the answer is we don't know. There's theories. I mentioned orchards, and people said, well, you know, many of the orchards, many have become intensified, or they're now housing estates, because and they were important habitats. But that doesn't really explain it, because there's still plenty of the green woodpeckers doing very well, and they like that kind of gardens and orchards and eat ants. Ants are doing very well, probably to do with climate change. Ants are marching further north. So we're not quite sure why wrynecks disappeared, because the simple answer that is often put forward for many birds, including the wryneck, is, well, it was just industrialization, agricultural intensification, etc., etc. The thing with the wryneck is, and the redback shrike, by the way, their decline started before modern agricultural and forestry techniques were implemented. So there was something going on in days of old, not just in modern times. So can't really answer it better than that. We don't know. People will have theories, but they all seem to have a few holes in the theories. Yeah. Sorry, one more thing. It's a migratory bird, and migratory birds suffer more than resident sedentary birds, don't they? Because they've got this huge Sahara to get across, trapping in the Mediterranean. So that could be one of the reasons why wrynecks disappeared, because Britain was always on the periphery of the population, and peripheral populations normally go first when things become extinct, don't they? So, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, they've got such a, I mean, one of the reasons why I love the wryneck so much is this exquisite plumage. I mean, there is no painting I've seen that can come anywhere close to what the real bird looks like. I mean, the mixtures of browns, greys, blacks, and whites, it's just incredible. And, you know, I've seen wryneck even in my local patch in London, in Wormwood Scrubs. You know, they are so unobtrusive, and as you said earlier, they can be confused. I mean, I personally can sometimes confuse them for a warbler, because they just fly off. They're not like a woodpecker, as you say. You often find them in areas totally away from wood or trees. And even in Spain, where they are, you know, I bumped into one actually a couple of weeks ago. They just show up, and suddenly you see it, or you might hear the geek, 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 and you think it's a bird of prey. I mean, I remember sitting in a car once in a valley, and I heard geek, 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 and I was thinking, oh, is that a bird of prey? And I spent 25 minutes just quietly looking around, and then all of a sudden I noticed that this bird was sitting literally 30 yards from me, 30 meters from me, on a rock, singing in the open, and I didn't see it.
A bit like a kestrel.
Yeah.
You saw one a couple of weeks ago in Spain. You see, then it's wintering there, because they do winter in Iberia and southern Italy, Mediterranean. They do winter. Some of them don't actually go all the way to Africa. Yeah, you're right. There's something about wrynecks. That's I like them. So I mean, there's something about them. They're subtle in many ways. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I think we've come to the point where I'm going to ask you a couple of very difficult questions. I'm glad you got your glasses on, because you might need them.
Right.
What is, in the entire world, your favorite woodpecker?
Right. One I haven't seen. Can I say that? It might ruin your next question. I don't know. My favorite one. Well, okay, we'll put the wryneck aside. I think it's got to be the black woodpecker, because being brought up in England, you know, I've lived most of my life abroad, but there are no black woodpeckers in Britain. And we're not going to talk about that. That would be another talk. And when I saw my first one here, it was in Budapest a long time ago. I just thought, oh, wow, you know, this huge thing, smashing a beech tree, making a cavity, wonderful. And I really got hooked on woodpeckers in general then, after watching this black woodpecker. And I wrote a book about it because I spent the next 20 years, every time I had any free birding time, I went looking for black woodpecker and other woodpeckers. So I think I'd have to say, but there's some crackers around the world, you know, there really are. Magellanic Woodpecker, Chile, Argentina. Have you been there, David?
Yeah, I've seen one.
Oh, and there's that famous David Attenborough scene in Life of Birds, I think it is, where he taps on a tree and this thing comes rocketing in, big red head. I mean, that's impressive, that one, Magellanic. So I'll stick with those two, black and Magellanic.
And of course, you've got the mystical ivory-billed woodpecker, haven't you?
I haven't seen that.
Well, I have. I've seen it in a museum.
Well, I've seen it in museums, in quite a few museums. And I've seen the Cuban one in the museum in Havana. I can brag a little bit. I'm one of the very few Western people to actually be allowed in there, and that's another story as well. But I got into the archive of Havana Museum, and they have a few very grotty specimens of the Cuban race of ivory bills. So I saw that, yeah.
Well, I can't beat that. I mean, for those who don't know, the ivory-billed woodpecker, which has been deemed extinct in the US, I don't know about Cuba, but it was the largest woodpecker. It's ginormous, isn't it?
Well, it was bigger than black woodpecker and Magellanic, but I haven't seen that, so we can't count that one. Well, I haven't seen it alive anyway.
And if you could be anywhere in the world, Gerard, notwithstanding wars and COVID and stuff, where would you be right now?
So when I wrote Woodpeckers of the World, or even before I was writing it, I had this dream or obsession to see all the woodpeckers of the world. So I embarked on traveling the world whenever I got the chance. It was good when I was paid for it, as a guide, but otherwise I did it myself, to see as many or all of the woodpeckers of the world, well over 200. And I don't want to give any figures away, but I was doing pretty well. And it got a bit difficult because if you went to a certain country, you get 3 or 4 new woodpeckers, and then another country, 4 or 5. And it came to the point where I would have to go to a certain country to see one species. You know, that's time and money. And the place I said, right, that's next, I'm going to save up, was the island of Okinawa off Japan. There is an endemic woodpecker there called Okinawa Woodpecker, funnily enough, Okinawa Woodpecker. And it's one of the rarest woodpeckers in the world because it's only found on Okinawa, and the habitat has been trashed or developed, and you have to go to Okinawa to see it. And it's highly endangered and rare and a long way away. So Okinawa woodpecker, I need that, and I'd love someone to pay me to go there to find it.
That's the most original destination we've had ever on this In Conservation With series. So
thank you. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? But
I'll always remember you for that. It's fantastic.
Okinawa.
Zoomers, just to let you know that on April the 11th, we have Peter Cairns in the hot seat, speaking from Scotland about rewilding. His big thing is about rewilding in Scotland, so that should be a very interesting evening. And there's more coming up in April too. We're taking a slight break in March, but in April there's going to be a few more people coming. So please look at the website, and don't forget, if you're not a member of the Urban Bird World community, please consider it, because amongst many other things, you can actually see the Q&A that's coming up next, for just for you as a membership benefit. So, Gerard, I'd like to thank you very much for sparing your evening tonight to talk to us about your favourite bird family and also the wryneck. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
And thank you also, and should I say, good luck with the book as well, of course, the Wryneck. And Zoomers, thank you very much again for supporting In Conservation Move, and also for anyone else in the future watching this. I hope you enjoyed it, and please leave your comments regarding anything, either in the chat or if you're watching on YouTube on the comment box underneath. And don't forget, keep looking up at those woodpeckers.